We're only months away from the release of the Switch 2 remake of Ocarina of Time. One of my favourite games ever is being, as Nintendo puts it, reborn, or as a recent ad in the Japanese Nintendo Summer Catalogue put it, reborn across time. As of right now, we still don't know what form this remake will take, whether it'll be a faithful remake a la the 3DS version or the Switch version of Link's Awakening, or a full from the ground up reimagining. Personally, I'm hoping for the latter. I love Ocarina of Time, I've played it 1,000 times, and that's precisely why I want something new. Ocarina of Time still exists. 2 versions of it that still hold up well today. I can't say I'd be disappointed with a gorgeous new version of this game, in the same vein as Star Fox, but this is an opportunity to do something new with it, to expand upon it, and I hope they're taking that chance. Like I said, the original versions still exist, and they always will. But given that we're still in the dark on how this new game will take shape, I thought I'd put together a list of things I'd love to see in the remake. I'll begin with the most conservative of my wishes, things that I really do think we'll see regardless of whether this is a one-to-one remake or a full reimagining, and work my way up to perhaps the more ambitious end of things. The most conservative option for the Ocarina of Time remake is to follow the blueprint of the recent Star Fox 64 remake. This game, simply titled Star Fox, is an incredibly faithful recreation of the original N64 title, just with gorgeous new visuals. However, the most important additions to the single-player campaign are the new cutscenes. There's a new prologue showing James McCloud's death on Venom, and scenes of the Star Fox team aboard the Great Fox, assessing their options and talking to General Pepper after every mission. These add a huge amount of detail and context to the Lylat Wars. They explain why, for example, the Star Fox team need to bother visiting Solar and stopping Vulcane. If the Ocarina of Time remake is, indeed, the very same game we all know and love, reborn with new visuals on the Switch 2, I could see them following suit and expanding upon the game's story with new cutscenes. We've already seen what might be the game's intro cutscene during the reveal trailer. The tapestry telling the legend of the boy without a fairy closely mirrors the Great Deku Tree's dialogue at the beginning of the original game. But perhaps we could see more cutscenes added throughout the game, or expanded versions of the ones that already exist. Ocarina of Time's story still holds up today. It's epic, tragic, and mysterious in equal measure. But there is definitely room to expand upon it, not just by adding elements of Zelda lore that have been introduced since the N64 era, which I covered in a recent video on the channel, but also by giving us a closer look at this world and its history. There are many instances where I think this would be valuable, but there's one story above all that I'd love to learn more about. The game takes place after a brutal conflict known as the Hyrulean Civil War. In fact, it was because of this conflict that Link, a Hylian, grows up in the Kokiri Forest. After completion of the Forest Temple, the Deku Tree Sprout tells Link, "Some time ago, before the King of Hyrule unified this country, there was a fierce war in our world. One day, to escape from the fires of the war, a Hylian mother and her baby boy entered this forbidden forest. The mother was gravely injured. Her only choice was to entrust the child to the Deku Tree, the guardian spirit of the forest. The Deku Tree could sense that this was a child of destiny, whose fate would affect the entire world, so he took him into the forest. After the mother passed away, the baby was raised as a Kokiri, and now, finally, the day of destiny has come. Outside of this, the Hyrulean Civil War is only ever hinted at. We know that the Shadow Temple was used by the Sheikah to interrogate and execute the enemies of the royal family, and thus marks Hyrule's bloody history of greed and hatred. It's one of the most fascinating parts of Zelda lore, and we really don't know much about it. And this remake, even if it doesn't change much, has the opportunity to expand upon this story. However, it'll be a difficult thing to balance. Part of why the Hyrulean Civil War is so fascinating is the mystery of it. Ocarina of Time takes place in the shadow of this conflict. We can see the scars from this war, but we don't get to see the full picture. If the remake expanded too much here, it would risk spoiling what makes the war such a tantalizing part of the world building. However, even a little more, extra lines of dialogue from the citizens of Castletown, or an expanded cutscene from the Deku Tree Sprout, would be incredible. Before we cover the next one, here's a quick word from this video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Logitech G, who were kind enough to send me some new equipment. A keyboard, the G316X, a mouse, the G305X Superlight, and a gaming headset, the G325 Lightspeed. I've been really impressed with everything they've sent me. The G305X Superlight is, well, super light. It's only 60 grams of recycled plastic, but is built with fantastic attention to detail and to a very high quality. The G325 Lightspeed, too, is really lightweight, without compromising on quality. And considering how often I'm sat here wearing headphones all day, that's really important to me. But the highlight for me is the G316X. I was in the market for a new keyboard after my 10-month-old decided to slam my last one, and this really is fantastic. It's got everything you need. There's 8 kHz game-ready performance, it has customizable hot swappable switches and keycaps, and most importantly, it just feels really great to use. There's that lovely chunk sound and feel, which is just so satisfying. Overall, I've been really impressed with the kit. It's really well-made stuff by a reputable brand, with incredible customization. If you're in the market for a new keyboard, mouse, or headphones, I really recommend them, especially the G316X, which is just wonderful. You can check them out with the link in the card and the description, and Logitech G have offered up a set to give away, so check the link in the description to enter. Thanks again. Ocarina of Time wasn't just the first 3D Zelda game, it laid the groundwork for 3D gaming as a whole. It's really interesting to look back at demo footage of the game, where you can see people playing on the show floor and fumbling around with it. This was their first experience with a game like this. With this in mind, Ocarina of Time's combat system was nothing short of revolutionary. However, because this was the pioneer, it's been iterated upon by every subsequent 3D Zelda game, and as such, it feels quite simplistic these days. It's a common criticism of Ocarina of Time, but a lot of the combat really does boil down to holding out your shield, blocking a hit, and then counterattacking. This is an area that I feel that even a faithful remake of Ocarina of Time could expand. Ocarina of Time's combat was originally conceived as chambara, a form of Japanese stage or film sword fighting. Takao Shimizu created the Space World 1995 3D Zelda demo specifically as a Zelda game with chambara-style action, and in fact, it was a field trip the developers took to watch a chambara performance that led to the idea for Z targeting, as the fighters on stage appeared to be connected by a string and circled one another. Considering how large a focus the combat was during the development of Ocarina of Time, and how groundbreaking and revolutionary the final product was for its time, it would feel like a little bit of a missed opportunity to leave it alone. It isn't completely timeless like Star Fox 64's on-rails shooting. It does feel dated, especially compared to games that came out only a few years later, like The Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. However, there are signs, that's a pun you'll understand in a minute, that Ocarina of Time's sword fighting would have had more depth than it does in the final release. In a 1999 interview, Shigeru Miyamoto claimed that the sword combat in Ocarina didn't turn out as well as I'd hoped, unfortunately. I'm pretty bad at action games myself, so I wanted Ocarina to have a system with depth, something you could steadily improve at the more you played. Though it didn't need to be as complex as Tekken, of course. About a year into the development, I realised that if we lean too heavily into the sword combat, it will definitely end up being more difficult than Mario 64, so we pulled back and eased into the simpler system we have today. And there are remnants of this extra depth in the final game. For example, it's possible to control the direction in which Link swings his sword. These different swings have entirely different hitboxes, but there's no enemy in the game that requires you to use this mechanic, outside of it being slightly easier to hit enemies who are above Link with a vertical swing and Dark Link parrying your sword thrusts. In fact, unless I'm missing something, the only time in the game it actually affects anything is when you cut a sign. It will be sliced based upon how Link swung at it, which, funnily enough, was also added at Miyamoto's request. Skyward Sword's controls are the most controversial aspect of that game, but it's unarguable that it does have a detailed combat system. Enemies will block in one direction, requiring you to slash in a way that slips past their guard. This could be a way to add a ton of depth to Ocarina of Time's combat by using mechanics that already exist. Miyamoto was probably right to keep things simple in the late 90s, but for a full remake releasing in 2026, there's no reason to limit anything today. Something that surprises a lot of younger fans when they go back to Ocarina of Time is just how small the towns are. Castletown is the heart of Hyrule in the Child era, a vibrant, bustling marketplace where people from all across the kingdom come to trade, to dance, and to gossip. And when I was a kid playing this in the late 90s and early 2000s, it felt that way. The illusion worked. But when returning to Ocarina of Time, it's definitely one of the areas that feels the most dated. The entire area is built from pre-rendered images, flat, static artwork with fixed camera angles, simply because the N64 couldn't handle a full, crowded 3D town in real time. But attempts were made during development. A build of Ocarina of Time from 1997 features a huge 3D town environment, very likely an early build of Castletown. What we see in the final version was probably a compromise, shrinking the scale of Castletown to maximise the characters present there, to try and sell the idea of a crowded market town rather than a sprawling but empty ghost town. However, just like with the sword combat, Ocarina of Time's remake will be releasing in a year and on a console where these limitations just don't exist anymore. The only reason to not evolve Castletown into a huge, detailed medieval city is to stay faithful to the original. Yet, it could be argued that doing so would be more faithful to the game's original vision. Some of my favourite areas in Ocarina of Time are the places that lead away from the busy market square, the quiet back alleys and the garden of the Temple of Time, where the music and the voices quieten. These kinds of places could be more abundant in a reimagined Castletown. Tiny alleyways and quiet courtyards full of secrets to uncover, or new characters to talk to. To a slightly lesser extent, the same goes for the game's other main settlements: Kakariko Village, Goron City, Zora's Domain, and Kokiri Forest. These don't feel as dated as Castletown, as they don't use the same 2D textures and fixed cameras outside of the houses, but they could still be expanded upon in a remake. Characters could be given schedules like in Majora's Mask or the Wild Era games, where they wake at a certain time of day and carry out different activities as the day goes on. Part of Ocarina of Time's magic is how immersive this world is, and the remake could look at the towns to maximize this. Finally, I hope that Ocarina of Time's remake takes the opportunity to fill in some parts of the game that feel rushed or missing. Now, Ocarina of Time is a pretty airtight experience. It's not clearly missing things like the Wind Waker, which does suffer in the back half from some cut content. But still, there are certain elements of Ocarina of Time that feel strangely empty, like loose ends. One of these, of course, is Zora's domain, which becomes frozen during the 7-year time jump. Even worse, Lord Jabu Jabu, the patron deity of the Zora, is missing in the adult era. Only a block of ice floats in his place. However, even once Link defeats Morpha in the Water Temple, it still stays frozen. Ruto does say that it will eventually return to its original state, and we do see in the game's credits that it does indeed thaw out. But this never happens in the game itself. The domain remains frozen, and Jabu Jabu remains missing. This doesn't feel like an intentional decision. It feels like something that was rushed or perhaps forgotten during development. And allowing us to explore a thawed out Zora's domain and interact with Jabu Jabu as adult Link would be a satisfying end to their storyline. But a more important area I'd love to see padded out, and my most ambitious hope for the remake, is the Temple of Light. Ocarina of Time's adult era sees Link gather the 6 medallions: Forest, Fire, Water, Spirit, Shadow, and Light, awakening the sages to aid him in the final battle against Ganondorf. Every medallion is gathered after the completion of a temple themed after its element, all, that is, except for the Light medallion. This is simply given to Link after he pulls the Master Sword by Raru, the Sage of Light, inside the Chamber of Sages, without any challenge. However, the Temple of Light does exist in this story. It's located within the Sacred Realm itself, and it's the place where the Triforce was hidden away, the place Ganondorf broke into. In fact, the Chamber of Sages itself is said to be within this Temple of Light, where Raru's power is the strongest, so that he could keep Link safe while he slept. It's certainly not essential for the remake, but I would absolutely love to see the Temple of Light expanded into a full dungeon, to bring the Light Medallion in line with the others. Although it's an ambitious wish, I don't think it's entirely outside of the realm of possibility. The Light Temple even has a room themed after it in Ganon's castle, just like the other temples do, with puzzles based on illusions. A Light Temple dungeon could theoretically be positioned in 2 different places in Ocarina of Time. Firstly, it could be explored just after Link pulls the Master Sword, as a way for him to become accustomed with his new adult form. Or, secondly, it could take place right at the very end of the game, just before Ganon's castle. Of the 2, I think that the second option fits best, making Raru's medallion the final one Link receives, and his dungeon the final challenge before the showdown with the King of Evil. Placing it here could also improve how Link receives the light arrows. In the original game, they're given to Link by Princess Zelda, which always felt a little strange. She's the 7th sage, the sage of time if anything, not light, and so finding this item in a new Temple of Light at the end of the game would make much more sense. Overall, I think a Temple of Light would be an incredible addition to Ocarina of Time. It already exists in the lore and the world, and would help patch up some parts of the game that feel a little empty. Of course, many would argue that we eventually did get this Temple of Light in Twilight Princess, with the Temple of Time, a dungeon accessed through the Temple of Time, with the Light Medallion's symbol marked throughout. But that's no reason to not include it here. There are plenty of examples of Zelda dungeons sharing the same name, theme, and setting, while being completely unique. Ocarina of Time's Light Temple already fits so neatly into the existing game, and I'd love for the remake to make it real. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already for more Zelda content. Cheers guys, and I'll see you next time.